Well, thanks so much for being here, man. Congratulations on the album.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, it's lovely. I love listening to it. It's some beautiful folk songs, man.
Thank you.
How long have you been playing folk music? How did you start playing folk music?
That's a long time ago.
And also, do you stand by the sort of genre of folk music? I imagine for most musicians, it's like, I don't know if I want to just be called a folk musician.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to fit roughly on what I do. I think that folk music, I mean, I like do these walking tours, or have done in the past. I haven't done one for a while because my legs are still a little achy off the last one, which was probably about 3 years ago now. So,
how long was the walking tour?
It was 500 miles, which is quite a long way in England, but in America it's hardly anything. It's kind of like where your neighbour lives, but in England that's the whole of the south coast.
So you basically you would walk to venue after venue?
Yes, exactly. And for me, that's kind of the essence of what folk music is, in a way. You know, it's kind of the music of the land, the music of just the kind of earth and the. And it sounds very, but yeah, I think, you know what I mean? And kind of walking from place to place, picking up songs passing down from word of mouth and that kind of thing. So for me, that's kind of folk music. And as much as I can, I try and kind of fit into that sort of thing.
So folk music for you is kind of something that passes on the sort of stories, and traditions may be the wrong word, but I guess you could say stories of our culture, of different cultures.
Yeah, I think so. It's sort of reflecting back. I mean, folk music is quite a modern. It always reflects quite, the current time. So I feel like
which you very much do on with a few songs on the.
I tried to a little bit. Yeah, I think that there's kind of there's this misconception that folk music is always about kind of like things that are very old. Yeah, but I think that that in 200 years' time there'll be folk songs in clubs and people will be singing about iPhones and won't really know what that is, but it'll be like this old, I know a song about iPhones.
Well, folk music's sort of really, not early incarnation, but at least when it exploded in America, it was extremely political. I can reference Bob Dylan alone, and his first albums before he went electric were all fairly political. And then there's a number of other artists of that time. I'm failing to think of any of them right now, but I know that they were political as well, for the sake of this conversation.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not something that, like, folk music has always, I think, or at least at that point, started as a kind of mainstream reflection for what was happening in the culture.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of all dates back to
Guthrie.
Yes, exactly. But I mean, I think in their ways, Dylan and Guthrie, as you say, were all part of revivals of folk, and I think that's just going to kind of probably has been going on for a long time and probably will carry on going on for a long time. It's always, it's one of those things that it always feels kind of quite new, but also very old at the same time, But it kind of all goes back to the traveling, I guess, kind of troubadours, and Italy, hundreds of years ago, the kind of traveling troops of actors that would go from town to town and kind of create plays around the current things of the day, and there'd be songs and kind of acting out little kind of skits and stuff, and that kind of is what folk. The whole thing kind of dates back to.
Man with a guitar. Right?
Exactly.
The simple aspect of a man with a guitar who's telling stories from the past or stories from the present.
Exactly right. And the walking tour thing for me was kind of an attempt to try and go back to that stuff. So folk kind of works for me roughly. I don't know. It's like when people say, "What kind of music do you make?" It's always a difficult one, because if you could sum that up in words, you wouldn't need to. Do you know what I mean? The kind of music seems to somehow transcend words, which is, I guess, why we kind of sometimes like it.
I gotta ask, what was the weirdest thing that happened to you on your walking tour?
I had a cheese sandwich stolen from me by a seagull in Falmouth. That was pretty terrifying. At first, I thought it was a human being. And it felt there was a lot of force to my back, and then I kind of looked around and there was this bird eating my lunch. So that was weird.
Pretty weird.
Yeah.
To build a wall, Will, what was the inspiration for that song?
Yeah, so I was basically in Belfast, and we saw the walls that run through that city. And I was in Berlin last year as well, and they obviously have the kind of remains of the wall that they once kind of used. Very, very, aggressive politics at work within people's lives, and now it doesn't exist anymore. You can walk through freely, and it's crazy that we invest so much of our resources and time and into these barriers, and then decades later they're kind of brought down, and it seems crazy to me. So I kind of wanted to write something about walls in general. But yeah, so I guess I just wanted to, I was kind of exploring the idea with that song and the idea of these barriers, and yeah.
You have this other song that I was talking to you during our break about that I'm fascinated by, and I said the title wrong then. I'm gonna say it again. One of the lyrics is "We know you're lying."
We
right?
don't believe you.
We don't believe you. And it's a beautiful song. And what I find so fascinating about it is in my opinion, what's so great about music, you can interpret it in many different ways, but it's a political song, is that you're talking about politicians and how the people don't believe them anymore, but yet the song has been put out at a time where like the old guard of politicians aren't believed anymore, but this new guard that have sort of capitalized on that disbelief are sort of taking us in even more dangerous directions, be it Brexit, Trump, Marine Le Pen in France. I'm wondering if that was where you were kind of coming from with that song.
Well, that song was written largely about the UK election that we had a couple of years ago now, and you're totally right. That we don't believe people, and then we kind of, as a kind of country, we start to believe in other people, and then they come in and they completely destroy everything. And that seems to have gone on for a very long time, But what's weird about that song is it seems to keep on kind of coming back, even though it was written about quite particular political thing in the UK. Certainly people from America and Germany and all kinds of places seems to connect with that song too.
It's certainly an interesting thing here if you think about it, because then it's gotten to the point here where people only believe in something that they know is lying to them. Like some of the things that people said about Trump here were, at least I know he's lying. Now right. I can work with that, which is crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems to be that when I wrote that song, I felt like there was quite a big movement of like feeling that we just can't really trust anything that anybody says anymore, and I felt quite sort of reassured in a way by the response that song got. And then Brexit happened, and you kind of think, well, are things moving forward? Is anything really? Are we learning anything as we go on, or are we just kind of perpetually going around in this circle? It's scary, You kind of, with someone like Trump, to me, it seems to me that he's basically almost like a Simpsons-style bad guy. And
he was the president in a Simpsons episode.
Exactly,
years ago as a joke, yeah.
Exactly, and some of the stuff that he was saying and doing before the election, there was this kind of such a clear indication that he was, as far as I could see, and who am I to kind of talk about this really, because this is your thing, and I've got a totally different thing going on, but it's kind of feels now that it's getting more serious than independent countries, and it feels like there's a movement, and it's not a kind of movement that I like.
It's the movement of putting up more walls.
Yeah,
go back to your other song.
Really quite. For me, it's the most terrifying time in politics that I've kind of lived through. And
well, my next question is, how do you find yourself? What's your process for writing songs about political issues or political ideas that you have or reactions to things that are happening in politics? Because for me, I find my reactions to politics are very direct, and it's very difficult to sort of carve out any kind of poetry from it because it's very immediate, direct, and articulated through my ideas about policy or agenda of the party or politician that I'm talking about. Whereas you're able to kind of craft a poetry out of your reactions to what is happening around the world.
Yeah, I mean, it is very much selfish. It's totally selfish. I basically worry about things on my own and, think about what's going on and obviously read the papers or watch TV or whatever it is. And I kind of just do it for my own selfish reasons. I kind of, by writing a song about things, I've somehow... it feels like I'm trying to make sense of things for myself. And then if other people then hear that song and it helps them somehow, it's amazing. It's an incredible feeling, but it's certainly not how I set out in the beginning. You know, there's definitely songwriters out there that kind of set out their plan and what they want to do and how they want to make people feel. But for me, it is definitely for myself when I write it. So if it comes out in a way that can make sense for somebody else, it's what a wonderful feeling. But it's not how I.
Do you ever have moments where you start writing a song and it feels too direct and almost maybe because oftentimes when you're too direct with a message as artists, it can come off as pretentious. Do you ever start that and you're like, oh, maybe I should build a metaphor around this or try to build some kind of, or does things come much more naturally to you?
I wish I knew. I'm sort of writing quite a lot at the moment, and it's very strange, really, because I kind of feel I know as much about writing songs as I did when I first started writing songs, and that was when I was about 8. So it's quite annoying, really. I kind of hope that I'd sort of know lots about it and be able to answer that question and kind of say, well, this is, and when the process is that I kind of do this, and if I feel I'm being too direct. But I genuinely don't. I write often on a hangover, I wish I could answer that. If I could answer that, I'm sure I'd be in a much better place for writing this next album, but I'm not.
On your last album, you had a song called Man Who Fell to Earth. I'm curious, was that at all influenced, at least the title, off of the David Bowie film and the past?
No, not at all. So that song is about a chap called Jose Matata, who he was from Angola, and he tried to stow away in a aeroplane and enter the UK illegally. And then as the plane came into land, the wheels opened and his body fell. And he was found the next morning. His body was found in a suburban street outside London. And I read this story in the newspaper, and he was 21 years old, and he was, he had like a pound coin in his pocket and a mobile phone, and he was just basically trying to find a better life. And I read this story, and I just couldn't shake it off. I couldn't get it out of my head. I couldn't file it. I suppose most things in our lives, we drive down the street and you see an advert or something, and it kind of gets filed somewhere in your head. And there's certain things that don't file properly, and that was one of them. And I suppose songwriting for me is a way of filing those things. And that was a story, an image that I couldn't get out. This guy lying amongst some of the biggest mansions in the country for 6 hours, just trying to find a better life. So that's what that song was about.
I'll take some questions from the audience right here.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good. The walking tour sounds so cool, but do you like camp? Or no?
We did camp. I've done a couple of them. The first one we camped all the time. And the second one, it was a much longer one, and I kind of decided that I'd try and find friends to put us up, because when you're carrying like a guitar and everything else, like a tent and a sleeping bag is quite
Okay, that wasn't actually my question. That was just like, I just wanted to know.
Okay,
I was so
right.
curious about that.
Bonus question.
But I was wondering, where do you kind of find your inspiration to write? Do you like find something consistently that has always inspired you, or is it kind of you see as you go?
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of been talking about that a lot, and it's. I think there's certain things in your life that always provide something. You know, there's certain rooms that you can go to, or certain places you can go to that you always get some element of inspiration from. But I don't know. I honestly, I think that inspiration is, by its very nature, quite an odd, untouchable thing. It's like do you know what I mean? You never know, and you can't. It's like you know, when you get these really old books, right? And they're like really old, and you can't actually read them. And if you try and touch them, they just kind of disintegrate. To me, inspiration is kind of similar to that. It's like finding this book, and you're like, "That's great. Let me have a look at it." And as soon as you try and look into it too much, it sort of disintegrates in front of you. And I think maybe part of songwriting, or maybe making any kind of work, is trying as best as you can to kind of gently lift that bit of paper and gently read as much as you can from whatever that thought or whatever that moment is. I don't know. Does that answer your question? Probably not.
I have another question for you. Where does this album cover come from?
This is by a chap called Tom Marignac, who's a very good friend of mine, and we've been sort of drinking together for the best part of a decade. And he does these wood blocks. So this is a hand. He kind of cuts into the wood, and then prints it. So this is a sort of hand printed thing. And he basically got a copy of the record, and I said, you know, do what you want to do, and that's what he came up with. And I love it.
It's beautiful.
And it's a bit annoying because basically when I sell records at gigs after the show, people say, oh, which CD shall I buy? And I say, I'll go with the one that you like the front cover of the best. And I made the other three myself, and people always choose this one now. So maybe I'll use them again.
Next question, right here, or whoever, right here.
Hey Will, how's it going?
Very good, thanks.
So I was just wondering, like, are there like any artists that inspire you or for your music, and is there like any artists that you would maybe want to collaborate with?
Yeah. So I guess for me, it's kind of two halves to that question. For me, there's kind of the greats. You know, there's Springsteen and Dylan and Neil Young and all of the kind of stuff that my dad basically used to play me when I was a kid driving around. And, you know, the kind of great songwriters, usually American or Canadian songwriters, Leonard Cohen. So, yeah, there's that kind of stuff, which for me is, you know, some kind of very important text. You know? And then there's also the other side of that is kind of like the musicians that I kind of meet. I don't have much time these days. I don't like listening to music on the go in my headphones, or I like to sit down and listen to an album. So in terms of new music that's coming out, I don't get through very much because it's quite rare that I get to sit down and kind of listen to a new record. But I do see a lot of bands and tour with a lot of bands. And in terms of inspiration, you know, people like Frank Turner and Beans on Toast, the Proclaimers recently, these guys that I'm kind of traveling with, the Arkells, Canadian band, who just teach me so much and inspire me so much on kind of like a really personal level, you know, and just to kind of travel around with someone like Frank and see what he does and to experience the kind of day in, day out life of basically entertaining every night. And I've taken a huge amount from people I've toured with, yeah.
So a lot of musicians, if they're a singer, they'll explore rapping, or if they're a pop musician, they'll do rock. Are you ever interested in exploring different avenues of music?
Yes, yeah, definitely. As soon as I can persuade some people to play with me, then it'll happen. I mean, I kind of I'll just basically write songs. So if the songs that I write start to feel like they need certain other musicians or go into other genres, then that's the way it'll go. I never set out to write songs on my own. You know, it just seems to just be the best way to tour them. But yes, I will.
Will, man, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for being a trooper today. Your album, Kingsdown Sundown, is available now, right?
Yes.
People can pick it up. Will Varley, thank you so much for being here, man.
All right. Thank you very much.